It was very difficult when I got this diagnosis. Unfortunately, because I had just turned 18, the decision was to put me in adult diabetes care. In hindsight, I think it didn't make the most sense because I really wasn't an adult. It was the first time I was managing something so large on my own, and it required a lot of growing up very quickly. My name is Preksha V4, and I'm a MD-PhD student in the MSTP program. I'm a second-year graduate student in immunology. I grew up in South Florida in a town called Parkland. It was very quiet, very open spaces. I spent a lot of time outdoors. For the first 10 years of my life, I was basically an only child. It was a little lonely, especially because my parents both grew up with a lot of siblings and family around them, whereas we were pretty much alone in the United States. They were the only people from their family that immigrated out of Pakistan. It made it difficult to connect with some of my classmates because they came from very different backgrounds, they didn't live very close by, they all sort of grew up with each other. I started to dance in high school, which really helped me connect with a lot of people with similar culture and share that with other people. We're focusing on finding ways to promote tolerance of the islets that we transplant into diabetic mice, and one of the ways to do that is to use bone marrow transplants before doing the islet transplant so that the immune system can then tolerate the islet transplant. And we're also focused on finding ways to have safer conditioning before bone marrow transplant. My dad went to medical school in Pakistan, and my mom was trained as an engineer in computer science. I was just fascinated by both of my parents. I looked up to both of them. If I was in a math or an engineering type of class, I would ask my mom about it, and I would really just think that the way her mind worked was very amazing. And then I would also be with my dad. Sometimes he would take me to the hospital, to the doctor's lounge, and let me just sit and listen, and I was also fascinated by that. So I think growing up with both of those influences, when I selected a major, it just seemed very fitting. I did always have this aspiration of going to medical school, but it wasn't until late high school and early college where I was exposed to the research side of it and found that there were ways to make sort of the bigger impact of bringing something for patients everywhere. These boxes contain the vials that are sort of my bread and butter insulin. This is the insulin that goes in my insulin pump, but I also have these backup syringes or pens of insulin. This is the inhalable insulin, which are these cartridges. The diagnosis basically just turned my world upside down. Here I was thinking I was gonna go to college, be independent, and do all these things that I was dreaming of, and then, someone else is telling me that all of that needs to be put on hold for a little. It was, I think, a lot to deal with and a lot put on my plate as a new adult. And that's when I just felt that there was something missing from the patient care of adolescents with type 1 diabetes, that I really wanted to fill that space and try to bridge the gap between the research side and what's available for those patients and also the patient care as well. I decided to start exploring both of those things at MIT and doing more clinical observation of patients with diabetes, trying my hand at some research in medical devices or in immunology, and seeing how can I bridge these things together and what sort of career path and place after college would allow me to achieve these goals. And Stanford was the place. The diabetes community here was full of people who had personal experience with the disease, whether that's a loved one, themselves, or just had, dedicated an entire career to researching this disease or meeting with patients with this disease, and they seemed very passionate. So it was the first time I felt really supported by a large group of people who understood what I went through and also understood the passion and motivation I have to be in a career of diabetes. And having that motivation is what sort of pulls you through the long research journey or the long path that you've chosen to take.